We have an expert. Today, we're talking with Tad Hussey of Kis Organics about using dry amendments in the garden. What is that white fuzz? What is the best way to apply dry amendments? Is nitrogen just nitrogen to a root? What are some pro tips for mixing custom soil blends and trace minerals? I discuss all of this with Tad, and he is a person who has worked as a consultant on professional cannabis grows in numerous states. He also formulates and perfects his own custom soil blends as part of his Kis Organics business, and he is also the voice behind the Cannabis Cultivation and Science podcast. Let's get into it. Oh yeah. Continue to watch this channel because Tad and I are partnering up for a weekly live 20-minute Q&A with you. It's going to be starting at the end of this month, but you can catch it here live on the ChadWestport channel. Let's get into the show. Thank you, everybody. We are back with Tad Hussey of Kis Organics, and we're talking about a subject that a lot of you are curious about. I was surprised to find out the amount of people out there using dry amendments, like myself. So I wanted to bring in the person, the man, the myth, the legend, Tad Hussey, to answer some of these questions. I know I build you up, but I think a lot. I think highly of you and what Kis Organics is doing. But how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good, Chad. I appreciate it, man. We've known each other a long time. I'm grateful for the opportunity to chat with you.
Well, thank you. And I'm really excited too because again, we're getting the right answers to the people. So let's just jump into this because a lot of people going dry amendments, they're doing that for certain reasons. Dry amendments though, they don't come in a bottle. So does that mean that all dry amendments are organic or can they also be synthetic?
Yeah, that's not a great way of determining organic versus synthetic. The big advantage of getting an amendment, a dry amendment, and then mixing it with water yourself is you're not paying for them to ship you water for liquids. A lot of bottled nutrients are just what you can buy in dry amendments and then add water to yourself. So that's the big thing. It's a little more complicated question as to whether something's organic because the way it's defined by the National Organic Program is not necessarily based off of organic or not. So you really have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
And I guess that kind of leads into, the next question here is just because an amendment is organic, does that mean it is safe for plant use and then later for, combustion and consumption? Are there any considerations that people should be aware of with organic or dry amendments?
Yeah, and again, I think just like the last question, I don't know that they're necessarily correlated in terms of safety. One thing, I'm an organic guy. I know you are too, but really for the plant, nitrate is nitrate, phosphate is phosphate. It can't differentiate the form that it's coming in. So it's important to realize like this, the safety of the product is really related to the product itself. Certain products, especially in organics, are going to be higher in heavy metals. So that's something that you want to be aware of. And then also how that amendment was processed and treated. Neem oil would be an example I think of because I happen to know of a facility that failed for pesticide residues because they sprayed a neem oil where that neem tree in India had been sprayed with some traditional chemistries that are no longer allowed here in the United States. So we haven't used these pesticides since the 70s here, but they were found in their final product in Oregon. And that's just because the neem oil that they received that was certified organic had these pesticides residues in them, low levels, but it's a tougher discussion around that. You really have to look at each product separately.
And two, you mentioned it was in Oregon. I know the Oregon commercial regulations are very strict when they look at what's in a product. And that's something too,
where you said being careful, it differentiates, a home grower versus like a commercial grower. We're all obviously concerned. We don't want to be introducing heavy metals into our bodies. However, sometimes at the commercial scale, it could be a negligible amount versus something where it's going to raise a large concern in the body. But yeah, like you're saying, absolutely be aware. Organic doesn't necessarily always mean, safe or healthy. We think of it that way. But for the purpose of the soil, though, we kind of prefer that because it is better for the soil microbes and the soil life, whereas maybe a synthetic would not promote the same amount of soil life in our plants. Is that correct?
Mostly. So interestingly enough, low levels of chemical fertilizers actually feed microbes. And there's a lot of research around that. I'm coming across sounding like a chemical guy. I am not at all. But I think it's important to understand the science behind it. So that is interesting. I think the biggest reason I choose to use organics is because I don't want to contribute to the chemical industry. I don't want to pay, the fossil fuels that are used to create a lot of the organics. So I tend to look at it less about organic versus chemical, more as sustainable versus less sustainable. So if that neem is being shipped all the way from India, but I could source nitrogen from blood meal, for example, or feather meal or fish meal that's coming from a closer source, then I may consider that, even though those are all organic options. I'm not going to turn to calcium nitrate, for example, for my nitrogen. Regardless, I'd rather use neem. But that's sort of my logic behind why I choose what I do in a lot of cases.
I love it. I love this conversation. Let's keep it going. Along those same lines, though, I've seen growers, and I've been guilty of this myself, but I've seen growers with like numerous individual amendments. It's like you're surrounded like it's a 80s rock drum set. But, they've got a whole bunch of individual amendments. And I've also seen and used complete products like the Kis Organics, the nutrient pack. Are there advantages for, a new grower, someone who's just kind of like getting into this and learning about the science? Are there advantages for a new grower using like a complete blend versus trying to craft their own blend using a bunch of individual minerals?
I mean, absolutely. What you're paying for when you buy a fertilizer, a commercial fertilizer of any kind, is that in theory, that company's done the research and testing for you. They've come up with proper ratios of these minerals for your plant and given you application rates. If you're doing it yourself, those are all things that you have to figure out. And that's fine. I don't want to discourage people from tinkering and stuff, because that's a lot of fun. If you do decide to go down that route, a couple of little piece of advice would be less is more. So I would stay in that sort of, anywhere from an eighth of a cup to a half a cup, up to a full cup per cubic foot of a dry amendment, depending on what the NPK value of that amendment is. But I wouldn't go any higher than that. And then also just make sure that if you're doing this, I would aim for having fewer amendments at first, because when you start adding all these variables, it's really hard to know what worked and what didn't. And then ideally, if you can do a soil test or a tissue test or something to allow you to see if your levels are optimal or, too high or too low for any given mineral.
And I've heard too with compost, you have to let your soil like bake or cook after you mix it up. Are there some dry amendments that applies to, or like commonly used ones, or is a lot of this you're just able to apply and plant?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what you're talking about is really when we make compost, we're balancing the carbon to nitrogen ratio. When they talk about like greens and browns, and then that that compost will heat up. And what's causing that to heat up is all this thermophilic bacteria reproducing rapidly. It's a exothermic reaction, and so it produces a lot of heat. And that heat will kill off weed seeds and pathogens if it reaches above 131 degrees. And so when we are mixing soils and we're adding nitrogen, usually is typically what's being added in certain levels, that may cause the soil to heat up. Now, if it does heat up, that's fine. It just means you added a lot of fertility all at once, and that your plant roots are not going to be happy if you try and plant into it right away. You got to let it cool back down to ambient air temperatures, add oxygen to it, let it go through that composting process. What we call cooking is really, you're making thermophilic compost out of your soil mix. So that's kind of what you have to watch out for.
Good, because I can see that unexpectedly catching a few growers off guard. And,
yeah.
And as far as the application of the dry amendments, what are a few ways that you can apply it to the soil? You kind of already mentioned, mixing it in, but do you have a preference for adding your dry amendments?
I do, and this is going to be a little bit controversial for folks because I know no-till is a big deal in organics, and I will say that what I like to do is to mix the nutrients down into the rhizosphere, that area around the roots, so that they're more accessible to the plants right away at that next cycle. If I'm doing this between cycles. Now, if the plant's already in the pot, then scratching it lightly into the surface or mixing it with a little bit of compost and then applying it is a great way to get those nutrients top dressed. Those are probably the two main ways that people would apply these sorts of amendments to their soil, or mixing them in prior to ever planting, when you first blend your soil mix.
Okay, good. Because I've always been the top dress kind of person. I'm in pots. It's usually sometimes it's 3, 5, or 7 gallons. So I'm usually, just top dressing and watering it in, adding it that way. For people though, like you said, who may, they may have the swimming pool or the tarp and they're mixing it all up before they put it into their pots. I know some of the ingredients, like you're only adding this much to, this much soil. Are there any tips for kind of trying to evenly mix it? So, pot A gets just as much as pot D gets?
Yeah, if you're on a small scale, getting a 5-gallon bucket with a lid and just shaking it all really good and adding everything in there and shaking it really well is good. If you get a little larger, then you can mix it all together on a tarp, wearing a respirator so that you're not breathing that dust.
Good.
And then
call.
A larger scale, a mortar mixer or something like that for mixing your amendments, and then applying them that way. And there's nothing wrong with top dressing. I want to make that clear. Like, it's just certain nutrients or minerals like phosphates are going to not move through the soil column as rapidly. So that's one reason I like to mix it in. And people, I think the biggest complaint to that is they don't want to destroy the soil biology or the soil structure that they have established, and created in their living soil. And that's a totally reasonable argument. What I will say though is when we use the term no-till, it's a bit of a misnomer because we're not actually tilling the soil. We're reaching in with our hands. Or our shovel. We're not damaging the soil ecology to the same extent as taking a mechanical tiller and just, rolling through there and just destroying all soil structure. So I like people to at least kind of think about that and realize there is a big difference between what we do in conventional agriculture and what we're calling no-till indoors. So it's not as destructive.
And is there a, agreed upon, like horizon layer? Like you can still go down 4 inches and consider it no-till, or is it once you break a certain depth, or is it just any general disturbance of the soil?
Everyone's got a different definition. We tend to mix our nutrients in about 6 to about a 6-inch depth when we're doing it on a commercial scale in like a raised bed, for example, setup. But otherwise, if you were in a 3 or a 5-gallon container, that doesn't really make sense. You're pretty much going to want to top dress the nutrients because you probably have a plant in there already. So yeah, it just depends on your setup. And it depends on the nutrients. So you mentioned some nutrients are, really, really small amounts. I think of things like potassium sulfate or egg sil, which is potassium silicate, or any of your trace minerals, like manganese sulfate, iron sulfate, zinc sulfate. A lot of those things you can get in water soluble forms, and you would want to mix with a decent amount of water and then apply it that way. Epsom salt, magnesium sulfate would be another one. But I just want to warn folks that I would tell you, if you're just starting out and you're not soil testing, don't even think about messing with trace minerals, because things like boron, 1 or 2 ppm is great. 5 or 6 ppm, you might be in a lot of trouble. So you just have to be very, very careful.
It's not a big margin of error there. And again,
It's
that's why
not.
these minerals are needed in micro amounts.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you struck my curiosity vein here with soil mobility as far as nutrients. When we're top dressing, some of that may not reach, the deepest levels of the root zone. However, there are a lot of people that like the sip containers or bottom feeding these days. So in that case, can I almost, top water it in one day, and then my next watering, maybe soak a little bit of it in water and bottom feed with that to hit the lower root zone? Is that effective, or am I trying to create a perched water table here? And that's another subject.
I don't know if I've ever tried that, honestly. Yeah, it's something someone could experiment with. I wouldn't be concerned so much as with a perched water table, because that more has to do with dissimilar layers of material. That's more your gravel with soil on top of it inside the container itself. That's where you get the perched water table. You're raising your water column. But if everything is the same homogeneous material in your container, you shouldn't have that issue with capillary action and water mobility.
Okay. Good to know. That answers one of my questions about the AutoPots that I use as well. So, all right, glad I asked. And yeah, I throw a lot of things out from left field, but it's fun to explore answers sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now this is something that's absolutely happened to me, and I freaked out the first time. I know it's kind of, well, I'll let you answer it. But after using some dry amendments, I've seen like a white fuzz on the top of my soil. And I'm like, what the heck is that? Is my whole room just going to get PM now? Like, Can you explain the white fuzz and how much we should actually worry? Because I've been told it's good.
Yeah, it's interesting that organic growers have always attributed this as like something really positive. But from all the research I've done and what I've seen, it's most likely just mold that's growing. If it's on the surface and it's fuzzy like that, and 90 some odd percent of these soil molds are really just innocuous. I mean, they don't have any real plant or soil benefit, but they're not pathogens either. So they're just, I guess you could say they have benefit in the sense that they're growing and cycling and decomposing the whatever you just added, whatever organic matter you just added. Typically, I see it with alfalfa meal or insect frass, something like that. But all I do is just either put a little more compost on top of it just to cover it up, or I will scratch it lightly back into the surface and then forget about it. It's not really anything to be concerned about that from what I've seen, but it's not really anything to be excited about either. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to have the most amazing soil. I've seen it with, practically sterile soil and with, highly fertile, high quality living soil. So I don't think it's a good indicator of anything either.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So it's good in the sense that it's not bad. And then just visually, because again, growing plants you got to be so patient. So when we see something happening, we get excited. And I've always been like, well, that must mean, the mycelium's working, the organic matters, the microbes, everything's working because there's this activity and there's this life. But that's not based in science. So, all right. Thank you for answering that one.
Yeah. It's gonna be a common one, and I'm sure people will have issue with it. But I haven't found, no one's really. We don't always know that it's the same molds that we're seeing across the board, because people aren't getting the research done. They're not putting this into like an ICP-MS to really identify exactly what it is that's showing up. So, yeah.
And I guess, relating to the microbial life and the mycelium, all of the interactions that we're trying to get in the soil, when you apply a dry amendment, how much time does it typically take? And I'm sure there's going to be some variance here, so I'm not trying to tie you down to a specific time. But, how much time does it typically take from the application of dry amendments until nutrients are plant available?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. There's so many variables. The biggest one being your watering and moisture content. Because if your soil is too dry, you're going to see less nutrient cycling. The microbes don't have enough water to really reproduce and cycle that. If your soil is too wet, then that dry amendment could be feeding pathogens. So you really want to make sure you're watering properly. And if you are watering properly, I would expect sort of 7 to 14 days is kind of the window where I see a plant response from a dry amendment. So if you're mid flower and you're suddenly seeing, okay, I need nitrogen, you might be too late for a dry amendment. At that point, you might want to consider something that's going to be a little faster acting, like fish hydrolysate is probably my favorite, go-to sort of quick bloom booster, for lack of a better term.
Readily available, closing the loop there. It's a waste product, so good to toss in the garden.
Really affordable.
Yeah, I hope so. Shoot. With the watering, so I'm close to the finish line here, and I notice a deficiency. Can dry amendments be mixed with water or like any other liquids to spray as a foliar? Are they fast acting in that sense?
Some are. Some work really well like that, like Epsom salts or magnesium sulfate is one of the easiest ones. I don't like to apply that unless I'm 100% sure I have a magnesium sulfate or a magnesium issue. And I would discourage people from adding any magnesium to their soils intentionally, unless they see that they have a soil test that supports a deficiency. Because most soils, just by using compost and other amendments, you're going to have enough magnesium, I found. That's just sort of an interesting little tidbit. But it really depends on the amendment. Like certain things are more soluble, like potassium silicate, which is allowed for use in organic production as a foliar application. That's a really great one to use as a foliar, for example. Also the Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate, but other ones like feather meal, for example, is probably not a great foliar application.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And geez, I've got some feather meal sitting back there in the box again. When I raised my hand earlier, the guy with all the boxes, I still have the collection, and I've narrowed it down to just one that I use and that I need, which is much simpler. But going back to what you were just saying with the magnesium, don't really feel you need to add a whole bunch, and that's because I've heard balance is important, and that is that one of the the main concerns with like mixing your own blends initially, and adding the like magnesium, as you said, because what can a soil out of balance do? Or what are you gonna have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing you want to consider with your soil, if you're mixing it yourself, is your pH. Now, fortunately, if you're using peat moss, compost, pumice, perlite, whatever aeration as your base, you're probably going to be okay already, because most composts are very alkaline, most peat moss is very acidic, so it's going to kind of balance for you already. But if your soil is not in an optimal pH range, then it's going to be really hard for your plant to get nutrients. It's just going to have to work a lot harder for that. And the less stress we can put on the plant at the beginning when it's trying to grow, the better. So that's the first thing I look at on a soil test. And that's something you can test at home with a pH meter, which is really nice. So I target 6.8, which is a little bit higher than what you traditionally would see in, hydroponics and things like that. So if I'm in a range of, let's just say 6.6 to 7.2, then I think you're probably fine, which is a huge range. The next thing that I look at is the balance of these nutrients. You need to have a lot of calcium in there. So gypsum is one of those amendments that you definitely want to have on your must-have list in your pantry or in your soil mix. But really, your soil should be formulated around your compost. So depending on what you're using for your compost really determines what you need to add, because some composts are really, really fertile and full of nitrogen and other things. Others are going to be much less fertile, and so you want to be able to account for that, which makes it a little bit trickier if you're just following an online recipe or crafting one at home.
Right, because we know, in your day-to-day life, professionally, soil tests and sap analysis, this gives you a lot of the results that we just kind of have to take a stab at, when we're doing this at home. It can be done. It's not exclusive to license holders, but sometimes it can be cost prohibitive for, a lot of the home growers.
Yeah. I totally get that too. So we have a lot of home growers that test their soil because they want to just dial it in and know, and we'll work with them on that. And every cycle they'll re-amend exactly what the plant took out so that you're really controlling that process. But that, spending, $60 to $90 on soil testing every month is not always practical, or every cycle, even if it saves you on fertilizer. So I totally get that. So like for my outdoor garden, which is mostly veggies, and I'll probably throw a cannabis plant or two out there, I'm not going to do a soil test. I'm going to assume that here in the Northwest, all the nitrogen's been leached out of my soil during the winter from all the heavy rains that we get.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just go ahead and go in there with a heavy hand, apply a general fertilizer. In this case, our Kis Organics nutrient pack, because I have access to it. And I'm going to put that out there because I know it's balanced, and it's going to raise all of my macronutrients to a higher level. But you could do the exact same thing at home, knowing that, you say you have that feather meal, you could add that to your outdoor garden as a way of adding nitrogen. Or I'm going to use granulated feather meal on my lawn this next season, for example, as a way of getting some nitrogen out there. So yeah, I'm not going to be testing any of those things. So it's absolutely okay not to test, but there are some things I want to mention that you can use as tools to give you an idea of where you're at, I guess, or where your soil's at. So rather than just waiting until you see a plant deficiency and then addressing it then, because at that point your plant's already been stressed, you've probably lost a little bit of yield or harvest. It may be minimal, but that is something that happens as you stress a plant. So what I like to do is if you have the tools, like if you have a pH meter and an EC meter, you can test that and see what ranges you're in. So make sure you're in the right pH, make sure that your EC is at a level that's not too high, but not too low, sort of thing. And that's a good way of just getting a general idea of fertility. It's not going to tell you, how many ppms of calcium you have, or magnesium, or sodium, or chlorides, or nitrates, or any of these things, but it's going to give you an idea overall of the general fertility of the soil.
And do you have a recommended way or best way to check soil pH or the EC of the soil for, a home grower with basic equipment? Do I need something special, I guess I would say, to test those things?
Yeah. So those really cheap, pH strips are not great, or things where you have to correlate it with a color, I found are not very accurate. But if you have an actual, pH pen or EC meter, you can make up a slurry, and something like that works really well, and 50-50 soil, clean water, and that'll give you an idea what's going on.
Nice. And you just add the two together, you shake it, you let it sit for a while, and then you come back and take your reading, and that will give you a close picture to what the soil pH or EC would be.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I guess we're talking soil, but again, I know someone's going to be like, does that work for cocoa? I've not tried it. I've never considered it. Actually, the runoff of cocoa can be accurate, whereas the soil, you need to go with the slurry test.
Well, you can do a runoff test. You can do a runoff test with peat moss too, and cocoa would be the same. The reason I don't use cocoa gets back to two things. So one, that sustainability aspect. The way it's harvested is really hard on the local ecology and the local community. And there's a huge fossil fuel cost to get it all the way over here to us in the United States. And then the biggest reason is a plant health thing. And because with living soil, we're putting all of these, dry amendments in there, we're really loading up our soil so we can just water, or primarily just water. The biggest issue I have with cocoa is that the pH of it is neutral. So it starts at 7, whereas with peat moss, it starts at 4.5. And the advantage of that is if we're starting at 4.5, I can add in biochar, which is alkaline. I can add more compost, which is alkaline. I can get more cations, which are, my calcium, my magnesium, and my potassium. I can get those in at higher levels without throwing the soil up to, 7.5, 7.8 sort of thing. So that's my biggest reason for liking peat moss. Coco coir I like better in the sense that it's easier to water. It's not as hydrophobic as peat. So you could even do a blend, but for me, it's that pH thing that's the big deal.
I like that answer. And again, I'm glad I asked. It gives me something to ponder more and a better way to explain that to people. Cause I kind of get that question about, living soil and cocoa, good, bad, can it happen? pH, that's a great place to start the conversation. So, all right. Learn something new.
I've seen some really good cocoa based living soils though. So I don't think it's a deal breaker for folks. It's whatever you have and you can get locally too.
And go into the feather mill, and those things come in boxes, and we need maybe this much sometimes. And this is probably a three-parter. We'll rapid fire here, but do dry amendments become weaker over the time, just like sitting on a shelf, assuming it's in a humidity controlled, temperature controlled environment?
I mean, to the best of my knowledge, no. I mean, if we're talking about a year, I wouldn't even worry about. If we're talking about 10, 20 years down the road, that I'm not as confident on. But the biggest thing is making sure that it stays dry. So once moisture gets in there, microbes are going to start proliferating, and that's when you get in trouble. But if you can keep it, somewhere in a dry, cool location, I wouldn't have any issues using stuff from last season. I have my nutrient pack in a giant bucket out in my greenhouse. It's super humid out there. The bucket's closed, but I'm going to use that next season and not even think twice about it. And I know the fertility is going to be just the same. So that goes for all dry amendments.
Which is awesome, +1 to dry amendments, because I have been bitten by the bottles in the past where, I didn't use all of the bottles one run. I tried something different, and I went back to them, and my plants let me know that, there was some chemical reactions going on. They didn't react how they should have. So dry amendments are more shelf stable. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
And can you, I guess, speaking of the two, we'll mix the two here. Can you use dry amendments and synthetic bottles at the same time? Would you want to, or are there certain use cases for that scenario?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, organic people are not going to like this necessarily, but yes, that hybrid approach to growing is where I've actually seen the best yielding, healthiest plants. Again, I'm an organic guy. I'm not going to do it myself, but I have to be honest with it. And if you want to really look into that, take a look at what the giant pumpkin community is doing. This is interesting because that's where I was working with people with giant pumpkins long before cannabis. And so interestingly enough, they were all using chemical fertilizers and tilling and doing all the same, conventional agricultural practices. And they kind of topped out around 1,000 pounds from seed to harvest. And then they started incorporating some organics like mycorrhizal fungi and not tilling, and then utilizing more and more organic properties in the way that they were managing their soil. And they actually found, and granted, genetics were getting better at the same time too. So this is not just management practices, it's a combination. But now they're over 2,000 pounds in the last 10, 15 years since we started. And all of them now are using a combination of organics and synthetics. So I know that if we're talking about yield, that's absolutely a difference. Because again, the plant doesn't care where it gets its nitrate, it sees nitrate. There's advantages to using organics because they feed the microbial communities, protect the plants. And I think that the biology there in the soil that you've created in your living soil is really where we get that true expression of cannabinoids and terpenes that make the final buds special. That's what people talk about. People don't want that same, not to pick on Athena, but that same same bud that every grower is putting out there on the commercial side. They want that unique expression of terpenes and cannabinoids. You know what I'm talking about.
I absolutely do. And I think a lot of the people that are going to watch this, subliminally or maybe consciously know that too, because they've made the decision. They're going down the dry amendment route. They're spending more time on soil biology. And gosh darn it, I'm glad you came to talk to me today. Thank you, Tad.
Yeah, I mean, we know a plant needs only a certain number of essential minerals and nutrients to grow. Like we've established that as humans, but we don't understand at all the complexity of the rhizosphere, what's going on with all the biology in there. And that's a whole nother conversation. But that's really, I think, what separates living soil grows from what everyone's doing with bottled nutrients on quality.
Yeah. And if people want to continue that conversation or learn a little bit more, where can they find you? Where can they find maybe this nutrient pack that we've spoken about as well? And I'm asking, so please tell us.
Sure. So yeah, we have a company, KIS Organics. It stands for Keep It Simple Organics.com. We do make products and soils specifically for the cannabis industry. We've been doing this. We've been making what people call living soils longer than anyone else in the industry, actually. And yeah, so the nutrient pack was designed as an idea of if you wanted to make your own soil, mix your own soil at home, but you didn't want to have to buy, 10 different small amounts of all these amendments, we put them all into a package for you and have an application rate. And so people will get like peat moss, a high quality compost or earthworm castings, and then an aeration amendment like either perlite or pumice or something, vermiculite, something like that, and mix it all together. And then they're able to go the full cycle with just water. Now, I said earlier, we formulate around your compost. So, or you should formulate around your compost. So it's a bit of a broad stroke. Like it's not going to be as exacting because I don't know what your compost source is. But we try to come up with something that'll work across a wide range of conditions. Or if you wanted to, another way to use it for folks is if you had local access to just a very low fertility potting soil like Happy Frog or Pro Mix, you could add a little bit of earthworm castings to that, just to add some more biology, or do a compost tea and then add the nutrient pack. And that would be another way of getting there too. That may be more affordable than, me or someone else sending you a bag of soil in the mail.
And are you on Instagram as well? Can people kind of follow there?
Oh, yeah. So we're on Instagram at KIS Organics. And then I also have a podcast called Cannabis Cultivation and Science, where I get to interview people much smarter than me on all variety of cannabis related topics that gets really, really technical, but very interesting. And I learn a ton.
Yes, I enjoy those as well. I learn a ton. And then that gets me to ask questions to you where I can learn even more. So hopefully people watch this and learn something and then go and learn some more with you. And I will put all of your links and websites down in the show notes, so everybody can just go down there and click those very easily. But if you guys have any questions for me or for Tad, we're going to be answering those on a live soon. So put them into the comments, hit us up on the Instagrams, and enjoy your day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Westport.